battle. If the cross is holy, what does that make the war it blessed? If the symbol of sacrifice was lifted over armies, then whose blood was being sanctified? Because war does not become holy by carrying a symbol. Symbols become guilty by what they authorize. The cross did not stay on a hill in grief. It was strapped to shields, painted on banners, pressed into armor. It did not preach peace, it advanced with legions. So answer the question plainly. If war holy, because it marched under the cross, or did the cross become unholy the moment it marched? Because war is organized killing, planned death, systematic destruction. Children do not die less violently because a cross is present. Mothers do not grieve less because the sword was blessed. Bodies still fall, villages still burn, culture still disappear. If war is holy, then mercy is alive. If war is holy, then love has conditions. If war is holy, then God sides with whoever wins. And if God blesses war, then God becomes a general, not a healer. Ask yourself, did the cross purify violence? Or did violence corrupt the cross? Because holiness does not need blood to spread. Truth does not need armies. Love does not conquer by force. When the cross went to war, it stopped being a witness and became a weapon. A weapon does not save, it selects victims. Once the cross chose sides, it lost moral innocence. Once it marched, it accepted the screams as collateral. Once it flew above soldiers, it told the dead that deaths were necessary. That is not salvation. That is justification. So no, war is not holy. And anything that makes war holy has already abandoned holiness. A cross that blesses killing is no longer a cross of And a salvation that needs war is not salvation at all. It is conquest with scripture. Cross of conquest, or cross of salvation. That question alone splits the symbol in two, because a cross that saves does not need soldiers. A cross that liberates does not arrive with laws, armies, and execution orders. A cross of salvation would have ended violence. A cross of conquest learned how to use it better. The cross of salvation speaks in word. It exposes injustice. It confronts power. It stands with the executed, not the executioner. It dismantles fear instead of weaponizing it. If salvation were its core, the cross would have remained dangerous to empires. A reminder that power humbles the innocent, and that authority must answer to conscience. That kind of cross cannot rule. It can only unsettle. The cross of conquest speaks downward. It commands, it disciplines, it demands obedience, it sanctifies hierarchy. It does not ask whether slaughtering is just. It declares annihilation's necessary. It does not liberate cultures, it replaces them. It does not invite belief, it enforces submission. This cross does not save souls, it organizes populations. History already answered the question. When the cross was lifted by the poor, it was subversive. When the cross was lifted by emperors, it became administrative. When the cross marched with legions, it stopped being testimony and became policy. Salvation does not need borders. Conquest does. Salvation does not need uniforms. Conquest does. Salvation does not need silence. Conquest does. Ask what followed the cross. If it were salvation, it would have produced freedom. Instead it produced colonies, plantations, forced conversions, burned shrines, renamed peoples, erased histories. That is not the fruit of liberation. That is the machinery of domination. So its cross survived, not the one that challenged empire. That one was buried. The one that survived was the one that could be worn by kings, stamped on shields, placed on flags, and preached without threatening power. That cross did not save the world. someone asks you to bow before the cross, ask a harder question. Which cross are you asking me to honor? The cross of the executing or the cross of the executioner? The cross that frees or the cross that conquers? Because only one of those needed an empire to survive. Ask the question religion refuses to ask. What kind of object earns a place on the altar? An altar is supposed to represent life, truth, reconciliation, and the sacred presence of the divine. So why is the centerpiece of that space an execution device? Not a teaching, not a healing, not a liberated community, but a tool of state terror. The cross has two histories, and the church hides one. The church insists on one story. The cross is about love, sacrifice, redemption. History tells another. The cross was Rome's most public instrument of domination. It was designed to break rebels psychologically, humiliate the colonized, warn occupied populations, enforce obedience through spectacle. Crucifixion was not religious, it was imperial messaging. This is what happens when you resist. Your God's cross wasn't a sign of salvation. It was a brand for the conquered, a mark to show who belonged to the empire's master. They nailed a man to that cross, then nailed us to centuries of suffering, a divine betrayal written in blood and broken promises. Your God's blessing was the empire's license to kill without remorse. Every drop of blood spilled was sanctified by their prayers. The cross carried by kings was soaked in the tears of mothers who lost their children. Faith became the tool of oppression, not liberation. Your God's cross is a coffin lid, sealing the graves of cultures erased and souls broken. Underneath it lies the truth they want buried forever. They call it a symbol of love, but it's a monument to empire's cruelty. The gospel they preached was gospel of death. Your God's cross shackled the mind, enslaved the spirit, and bled the land dry. It's not salvation, it's spiritual execution. Because the cross was never theirs to bless, it was theirs to conquer. Even the cross was a curse held high before the flames, a mockery of salvation shown to those they condemned to burn. Before the fire swallowed their bodies, before the smoke choked their last breath, they forced the cross in their faces, not as a sign of hope, but as a final weapon of terror. The cross was the cruelest reminder: repent or die, submit or be ashes. It wasn't mercy, it was torture dressed in holy robes, a twisted ritual of fear, pain, and control. They used the cross to silence voices that dared to speak truth, to break spirits that refuse to bow, to kill resistance with the weight of divine judgment. The cross did not begin as a symbol of love. It began as an instrument of execution. It entered history soaked in blood, designed to humiliate, terrorize, and silence. Rome did not invent the cross to save. It invented it to break bodies and warn the living. Christ was not crucified to make the cross holy. The cross crucified him to make an example. That is where its mission truly began. After the crucifixion, the cross did not disappear. It migrated. First from an execution stake into a religious emblem, then from an emblem into a banner. Once lifted from the ground, it was no longer a warning from Rome, it became a warning from heaven. And that transformation changed everything. The cross left the tomb and entered conquest. It flew on shields, it marched on flags, it stood at the front of armies. It crossed oceans before it crossed hearts. Where the cross went, soldiers followed. Where soldiers arrived, land changed ownership, languages fell silent, gods were outlawed. The cross was not asking to be believed, it was demanding to be obeyed. Entire nations were conquered under its shadow. Not because they rejected love, but because they resisted domination. Resistance was renamed rebellion, defense was renamed evil, survival was renamed sin. And the cross stood above it all, quietly approving. After the land was taken, the work was not finished. Because land is temporary, minds are permanent. So the cross shifted its mission from battlefield to altar, from physical domination to psychological occupation. Now it was no longer a weapon of war. It was a symbol of holiness, no longer raised by generals, but by priests. No longer threatening the body, but disciplining the conscience. The conquest moved inward. The cross taught people to accept suffering as virtue, to see oppression as purpose, to interpret trauma as divine plan, to kneel before the very symbol that arrived with their destruction. This was the final victory, when the conquered guard the symbol of conquest themselves. The cross finished what the sword began. Armies subdued the land, doctrine subdued the mind. What force could not fully erase, theology refrained. Pain was spiritualized, loss was justified, memory was baptized and made unrecognizable. Today, the cross rests on altars, polished, sanctified, defended. But symbols do not lose their history, because candles surround them. The cross still carries every battlefield it flew over, every culture it silenced, every mind it taught to surrender. This is why questioning the cross feels forbidden, because it is not just wood or metal. It is the final flag of conquest, a banner that no longer needs soldiers, because it convinced the conquered to kneel willingly. And yet, even under its shadow, the truth remains. The cross did not save the world.
An empire cannot survive spiritual chaos. It needs one symbol, one story, one authority. Constantine understood something before theologians did. Religion is strongest when it commands loyalty deeper than law. So the cross was not chosen because it was gentle. It was chosen because it was useful. Why the cross marched with Roman soldiers? Rome already knew how to conquer. What it lacked was moral justification. Swords win territory. Symbols win obedience. The cross solved a political problem. It unified soldiers under one banner. It framed killing saw the vision. In this sign, conquer. Notice the verb. Not heal, not forgive, not liberate. Conquer. That is not the language of a carpenter from Nazareth. That is the language of an emperor. Why kings and queens embraced it. Kings do not adopt beliefs that weaken their throne. They adopt beliefs that sanctify power. The cross became perfect for monarchy because it taught obedience is holy. Suffering is virtuous. Resistance is rebellion against God. Authority flows downward, never upward. That mirrors empire perfectly. So kings placed crosses on crowns. Queens built cathedrals with taxes. And obedience to throne became obedience to heaven. The cross stopped being a reminder of injustice and became a stamp of approval on hierarchy. Why it came with force, not persuasion. Truth does not need armies. Empire does. If the gospel was self-evident, it would not have needed legions, laws, or executions. But Rome did not spread the cross by conviction. It spread it by replacement. Temples destroyed, indigenous shrines burned, ancestral rituals criminalized. Conversion was not invitation, it was survival. Accept the cross or lose land, status, life.
That is not faith.
That is coercion wearing theology. The cross as imperial technology. Rome did not abandon violence. It rebranded it. The same empire that crucified rebels now claim the cross as sacred. Think about that inversion. The instrument of terror became the symbol of holiness. That alone tells you this was not spiritual revelation. It was psychological conquest. The cross functioned as a loyal